Oh, hello there. Welcome to the Big Fat Chat. My name's Dan, and this is solo podcast number 4. So, this podcast is dropping on Saturday, the 15th of December at 9 a.m. And it's dropping on YouTube, SoundCloud, and Apple Podcasts. As you can see, we are all alone again. Just me and you and me, both of us together. Because I haven't had a peep from Di this week. So, in that vein, I'm assuming that this will be the way it goes forward. And I'll try doing some of the fun YouTube crew stuff every once in a while. But this looks like the way that it's the way that it's going to go from now on. Little Danny solo. And I feel like the pod, he's kind of taken a wrong path anyway. It's kind of lost the vision that I wanted at the beginning. And, you know, the forcing of episodes is kind of taken away from what I set out to do in the first place. So, you know, the initial idea of the Big Fat Chat podcast was to talk honestly about mostly serious, current, or interesting topics, and then just add some Di and Dan humour into the cake mix just to help it rise. That's what the original plan was, and that's what I really, really wanted to do, and that's what it became, to be fair. But over the last couple of weeks, what it's ended up being is just a little bit of a muddle, and I just kind of, if someone was to ask me what my podcast was about, I'd probably be unable to answer them, which is unfortunate, you know. So the way that I'm basically now, okay. So last week, or the week before actually, I dropped solo episode 3, Pedophiles Are People, and it was obviously about the famous TED talk about normalizing pedophilia, and I realized that is what I want the podcast to be. Just a sit down and a look at a topic or an expression of an opinion, and then to open it up to all the people who are listening who share my opinion or have polar opposite ones, and then engage in a conversation about it. That's what my original goal was for this whole podcast, and that's what I really, really wanted from it. And it stopped being that for me. And I just really like to engage with people, and whether they're disagreeing or agreeing with me, I just want to engage with them. So I kind of took this topic because obviously it's very current. It's Christmas. It's coming up to Christmas week. It's very current because it's Christmas. So I thought I'd look at the interesting backstory of Santa. And, you know, that's interesting to me. And if people aren't interested in what I have to say, then you just don't have to listen, and that's fine. And if you do want to, then let's have a chat about it as well. But what I found was the thing that was cathartic about this podcast in the beginning stopped existing. And what it was just kind of, it was my therapy. Like I said loads of times, it was my therapy. It was my 1 hour, 2 hours a week where I sit down and I'm not dad, I'm not the partner, I'm not kitchen manager, and I can just talk about things and get things off my chest. And I feel like you, my listeners, and me, we should have like a kind of equally beneficial relationship, and you should get something from this podcast, and so should I. And that's what I wanted. So just forcing myself to do them, it wasn't the way to go forward. And the last couple of times where I've been expecting Di and he didn't show up, and then I had to rush it, and then I had to force it, and it just shouldn't be a chore, I don't think. So now, like with the podcast going forward, what I want to do is just look at something that interests me, like you know, I mean, well, every solo one I've ever done, if I think about it, it's had a much more kind of defined thing that I'm talking about. So with Solo 1, I was talking about relationships. That was a very deep one for me, and it was quite cathartic for me there, because that was my first ever foray into podcasting. It was my first ever foray into talking to myself about things that actually have an emotional grip on me. Then Solo Podcast 2 came along, and that was, I kind of split I made myself even more bare, because I was talking about loss and grief, and that was kind of also uplifting for me in a very weird way. It uplifted me because, like, after I'd had a little bit of a sob, it made me feel better, you know. It made me feel like I got something off my chest. And then Solo Podcast number 3 came, and I was talking about something that I've been really interested in for a long time, and it's the mindset of pedophiles and kind of what makes them act on it, and what kind of makes them tick to a point where they are more than prepared to just kind of destroy their lives for this satiation of an urge. I don't know if satiation, to satiate an urge. I don't know if satiation is a word, but satiate is, so we'll use it. And now this one. So what I'm really interested in, like, backstories of everything. So Christmas comes, and I'm like, yes, let's actually find out what this shit is, because like, as Christmas comes, you always hear that Coca-Cola invented Santa Claus as we know him, and little things like that. So what I've done is, just before I start, actually, Di and I haven't fallen out or anything. So if he texts me saying he wants to do a podcast, I'll be on it immediately, because he's got this insight that others can't bring. But he's just too busy with his own stuff to commit to this on top. And I would just rather know where I am so I can just move forward. And I would like you guys to know where you are. So if you came here to listen to Di, it's really likely then that he's going to be around a lot less than you expected. And the weekly episodes are going to be more geared towards a more serious, interesting topic. I did really enjoy the crazy ones with Travis as well. So if I can squeeze a few episodes of just like absolute absurdity with the YouTube boys every couple of months, or a few times every month maybe, I'll aim to do that too. But the solo ones they're going to take primary role, and they're going to be the ones that drop on Saturdays from now on. Because I just know exactly where I am with them. There's no surprises with them. I can throughout the week kind of look at what I'm going to talk about, and then I can just kind of do a little bit of research, and I can, make myself more literate on the subject, and that's what I'm aiming to. And it's unfortunate that we're probably going to lose. I haven't really spoken to him about it. This is the thing. But what I feel is best for just like my organising of the podcast, because it's it's me that does all the editing, it's me that does the uploads, it's me that does all the social media stuff. So just for me and myself, I feel like I need to just know exactly where I am. And then just one more little bit before we get into the main topic is a little bit of housekeeping. I did say I promised to get a new episode dropped every week for 2 years. But Christmas week is Christmas week, and it's time for family and loved ones. And just for that week, I'm not going to be looking at dropping a podcast. Weirdly, the week after, it's my fucking birthday week, and I'll be away, so I don't know how I'm going to work that out either. But the show will go on, maybe. I'm just going to have to figure out a way to just kind of to do it when I don't know if I can do it when I'm away. Again, that's family time, and I don't really want the stress of explaining why I'm faced up to a mic on my time off. But another thing that I've been dedicated to is the music stuff. So like my album, I have very, very little work left to do it, and then as soon as this is recorded and uploaded, I need to get writing on it. I've had the full sleeve back, the full artwork, so that's amazing, from a guy called I Am Dead Bird. You should definitely look him up if you want any sort of like digital artwork made. And then I need to record 2 more songs and then master them all, and then I'm done. So I'm looking at late January release maybe, so I can get Josh down here and master what I I'm struggling with. And then that's it. It's out the way, and then that frees up so much more time because I've dedicated the last like 2 months straight to like whenever I've got free time, that's what I'm doing. I'm just writing songs and writing songs and writing songs, and it's gone from a 6-song EP to a 10-song EP. So I've just been plowing way too much work into it because considering I can't sell it and I can't make any money off it. It's just like purely a nostalgic trip for me, I think. But that's going to be free to everybody. And I think I'm going to do a special kind of podcast episode where I'll literally just go through the whole album. I'll explain why every song exists and the reason behind it. And like that'll be the first time that anybody hears it before it drops. I'm going to do a limited physical release as well, which I think is quite cool. Is when I'm going to have actual like CDs duplicated and printed and kind of given to people that are really like I'm giving it back to my mates who were around when I did the first EP, which has gone missing. It just doesn't exist anymore, and it saddens me. But yeah, so there's some really exciting things coming. The start of next year, just after my birthday, because like the week after Christmas, between the first and the 7th, I'm just going to be otherwise engaged with my 30th because I'm turning 30. But after that, there's some, that's a really exciting release for me because it's like it's the hardest I've worked on a piece of on an album or pieces of music in a long time, and it's been what I've found is it isn't my best. I found that because I've put a time limit on it, I'm rushing it, and I find that some of the lyrics I could have just written certain songs better, but I just haven't got the time now because the whole concept was a decade, and the decade is looming. So maybe in a couple of months I'll sit down and I'll do a song that I can really, really be proud of and really call it my own. Like I might create the beat, I might do everything myself so that it's all 100% above board, and then I could actually like make a little bit of cash off it. I don't know. But that's where we stand at the moment with the album. And that's pretty much it, I think. So we'll go into the kind of what I've been looking at. Like, where did it start? And I love the origin stories of certain things. And I accidentally came across the origin story that I found the most interesting, which is about Christmas trees and the reason why we use Christmas trees and the reason why we light them and decorate them. And this isn't necessarily about the Christian Christmas traditions, but this is basically the traditions that aren't seated in religion, but are still Christmas traditions, if you get me. So Santa Claus, giving of gifts and things like that. So that's not, that's not grounded in Christian Christmas as the birth of Jesus Christ, but it is in our world's kind of other Christmas traditions. And like I said, one of the weirdest ones I came across, because I've never actually thought about it, was the Christmas tree, and why in particular we use the fir/evergreen tree. That dates back to when the winter solstice would just kind of leave certain countries just blacked out for 24 hours a day over a period of time. I can't remember how long it is, but it would literally just wipe out the sunlight for blah-de-blah weeks or months or whatever it was. And you can imagine living in a place like, Canada or Alaska in pitch black, and this is before central heating systems. So like you sat there freezing cold, can't see a fucking thing, right? And this is what people were doing, and several people in like a single family in a single household could just die during these horrible times. Like, so during these times that are actually like just horrendous, through like obviously the cold, and some would die because of disease. So when the sun came out, it brought a warmth, and the sun's light started to symbolize kind of life to people. So when the sun came out, it meant that like most of the woes of the winter solstice had kind of subsided or just gone away altogether. And through that whole time, the whole winter solstice, people in your family dying left, right, and centre, the people realised that even under the most horrific, terrible of cold situations, one tree seemed to survive and sometimes thrive, and that was the evergreen tree, the fir tree. So to a more kind of simple people, a simple society, it was a sign that the tree had powers to maintain life, in a way. So when the winter solstice was, like, when it was upon them, they would sometimes bring the fir tree inside the house and then put lights on top of it to kind of signify the sun's light. So they had this kind of effigy of something that could bring life, that could keep them alive, because light was obviously extremely important in the darkness. And then this life-giving tree, or the tree that had the ability to survive the harshest of winters. And they had it in their house. And then some would actually create like mistletoe wreaths and hang them around their house or on their door, again, as some sort of amulet to protect the household from the cold and the other dangers of the winter. Which, before today, I wasn't really interested in. But now that I found that out, I'm like, oh wow, that's why we use certain trees, because that's a Christmas tree. That's why we call it a Christmas tree, and it's because during the winter, it would be used as an amulet to protect the household from the cold. So again, if you actually look at that in modern society, there's absolutely no point in a Christmas tree for that. Do you know what I mean? Like, so that the tradition that started with fear and kind of shit, I hope I don't die, has turned into like, oh, we need a Christmas tree as part of a decoration. It isn't thought of, and I didn't think of it because I didn't know. You don't think about it as anything other than this decoration part. Is part and parcel of Christmas. And again, it has absolutely nothing to do with Jesus' birth. And then obviously something else that doesn't have anything to do with Jesus' birth is modern day Santa Claus. And I think what we all assume is that our modern day Santa Claus just came from a single origin, and it seems like that is not the truth. It's an amalgamation of many, many things. And we all think that it came from Saint Nick, which we'll speak about in a little bit, but which is true as well. I mean, the story of Saint Nick is the one that carried through to our modern day Santa Claus, but like the things that have come together to kind of create modern day Santa is crazy. So before Santa Claus, England and the UK kind of had Old Man Christmas or Father Christmas, and only in recent centuries have they started to merge into this kind of, jolly, red-suited, omnipotent, bearded old man who breaks into your house and leaves presents for the kiddies. Like, do you know what I mean? But before merging it all, we had the UK and England. Well, England and the UK, we'll say, had the pagan Father Christmas or Old Man Christmas. And he wore long green, like a long green hooded robe. And he wore a wreath of holly, ivy, or mistletoe on his head. And this guy kind of supposedly represented the coming of spring and the ability to make people happier through the winter months, right? So this was pagan Father Christmas, not Santa Claus, but Father Christmas or Old Man Christmas. And then obviously Germany had Christ Child, I think, and then you had the Dutch who had Sinterklaas, which eventually would become Santa Claus through a Dutch to English translation. But we'll talk about that a little bit more in depth. Did I just knock that? Fuck's sake. Sorry, I'm overcoming a cold at the moment as well, so like you just have to deal with it. So we had green Santa Claus, or green Father Christmas at least. And then the story is that Coca-Cola came along in the 1920s, 1930s, and they designed big old fat man red Santa. And that's not true. So anyone who tells you that's true is a lie. Google told me. Jeeves told me. So it has to be true, okay? But I'm going to back myself up with this, with in-depth research over a 20-minute period before I started recording this podcast. And then, Coca-Cola invented Santa Claus. Dun, dun, dun. And yeah, like I said, it appears to be complete and utter horseshit. It is true that the stand-in design, the design that we all know, came about because of the Coke designer. I remember his name. Hold on, Hardon Sundblom. I think yeah. Let me check. Hardon Sundblom. I don't know if that's how you say it, but he made that design famous, more famous. The red and white guy that we know now. He made it more famous in the early 1920s, but he took a lot of cues from an earlier artist called Thomas Nash, who drew some very famous Santa pictures in the latter part of the 1800s, like 1880. I want to clutch 1883 or 1886, with Santa dressed in a red and white robe and smoking a long ass pipe. So that Thomas Nash picture is kind of one of the ones that kind of started the ball rolling with Red Santa Fatty. And then obviously pictures of, like, the original pictures of Saint Nick, who'd been pictured wearing his red bishop robes from the 3rd and 4th century. So to say that Coke invented Santa, it isn't true, right? So, like, they definitely had a hand in creating the famous version that we use today, but all they did was manipulate an idea that already existed like 40, 50 years earlier through Thomas Nash. And again, Thomas Nash was inspired by the original paintings of Bishop, whatever his fucking name is, Nicholas, Saint Nick, that's the one. But on the idea of Saint Nick, then, the idea of actually giving gifts on Christmas and having a man, like having a man-like deity involved in the delivery of them, definitely came from the 3rd century with Saint Nick. He wasn't a saint at the time, but because of his doings, he became a saint. He was a bishop in a place called Myra in Asia Minor, which is, if you look at modern world, it's kind of South Turkey. And the idea behind it apparently came from the story of an old man who had 3 daughters, but he was like poor as shit. And he couldn't afford a dowry for any of them, which in turn meant that his daughters couldn't marry. So, like, a dowry, you don't hear about it as much these days, but it does still exist in sometimes. It's not as prevalent now. But basically, it's just a wad of cash that you give to the groom for marrying your daughter. That's essentially what it is. There's obviously different sides to it, but if you want a layman's term for it, a dowry is just a wedge of cash that you throw at the groom for marrying your kid, like. And it does still go on around the world today. But basically, Saint Nick, or Nicholas, Bishop Nicholas, found out that this guy couldn't afford a dowry for any of his daughters. So he took it upon himself to fix it by just dropping a bag of gold down the chimney, which just so happened to land inside a stocking that was it was just drying on the fireplace. So it just so happened to land in this stocking, and that's where the ideas of stockings came from. It's just someone left a stocking on the. To me, if you think about the logistics of it all, it doesn't sound legit, because it would have had to have been hanging inside the fireplace, and why would it be drying in there if the fire's not on? I don't know. I'm not gonna rip it apart, but he dropped this thing of gold, and it led to the poor man's daughter being able to get married. Yay! And he could just chuck some cash at the groom, like, you have my daughter and a wedge of gold. And then Nicholas did it again, dropped it down. I don't know if it landed in a stocking the second time. If it did, I'd start to question. But he put this gold. Now, right, I have to prefix this with, well, it's not prefixing because I'm in the middle of it, but I do have to say that there is other stuff. There is other stories and folklore that says that he put it through a window. There's some folklore that says that he did it because because basically he was a Christian, and because he was Christian, and around the time that he was living, there was like an order to destroy all Christian scriptures and and like literally kill people who come together and praise a Christian God. And Saint Nicholas, or Bishop Nicholas, wanted to prove that people needed faith in something. So he designed this person who would give you gifts, but you would never find out who he is. So there's loads of stories, but what seems to be the biggest, the sweeping statement is that he gave this man money for his daughter's dowry. Okay, so that's the way I'm going now. I kind of like the religious side of it, where he tried to do it to kind of instill a kind of hope for people. I kind of like that idea, and I wouldn't mind exploring that a little bit more. But for now, he's giving money to a poor old man who can't afford their children's dowry. Okay, so he drops it down the second one, and this poor guy now is just like, the fuck is going on here? Because he's obviously Irish. So he decides that he's going to wait inside the fireplace for the third time, because he's got 3 daughters. And he waits, and every day passes, and he finally hears this clinking of gold coming down the chimney, and then he jumps out and sees that it's Bishop Nicholas. And obviously, Nicholas begs the man to keep it quiet, because what he needed the anonymity. He didn't want it to be a human that's doing it. He wanted the idea that it was something else that was delivering these gifts. Do you know what I mean? And that's kind of where the power laid in the message of it. But obviously, you know, he didn't want to bring attention on himself. But obviously, not long after the news breaks, Bishop Nicholas drops secret presents to people in need. And so it became all people who received these unexpected gifts. It was just automatically assumed that it was Nicholas, and he became a saint for that. And I think this is the cool part about that story, is like the guy, he went on to be arrested and he died in prison, I think. And they say that I think his bones, his skeleton, is being kept in a church somewhere. But they said that when they found him, he had a broken nose, so like he could have been beaten to death, or there was some stories of him punching out at some people that he didn't like. So he died on the 6th of December at one of 2 dates, and I can't remember what the 2 dates were, but there was miles between them. It was like I don't know. It was in the 300s, I think. Oh, why can't I remember? I don't know. But yeah, I think I think the story of Saint Nicholas is quite cool, and I think I'd like to think that it was more about the kind of the aspect that he was trying to instill hope in people by making it look like something extra had happened, rather than just a guy throwing gold down a thing. And he seemed like it was worthy of him becoming a saint because of it, because, you know, he made an otherwise shit life just that little bit more pleasant just by dropping these gifts off. And obviously he isn't the guy who comes about in reindeers. That came about way later, and it was from. I tell you where it was from. It was from the. I think it was the poem. A Night Before Christmas. A Night Before Christmas was the first poem that ever had him flying reindeers, I think. And it was called, before it was called A Night Before Christmas, it was called A Visit from Saint Nick. And this was the one that kind of started to cement his legacy as a farty in people's minds. So it was the first time that all the reindeers were mentioned. And it was the first time that, his belly fucking jiggled like a bowl full of jelly and those things. And then very soon after came Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, and I think I think that was in the 1950s, 1949. I've taken in a lot of information, so I can't remember it all, right? But I think Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer came out in 1949. But in the 1800s, this poem, A Visit from Saint Nick, was the thing that started the drawings for Thomas Nash, and then it went on to be Hard on Sunblom, creating the Coca-Cola adverts, and then they started doing 1920s, 1930s. The Coca-Cola adverts started to take over, and then that became today's Santa Claus. And then it went, so it's gone from the odd person getting a bit of gold down the chimney, because the St. Nicholas story started to die off, but they needed something to keep people kind of engaged in the Christmas festivities. And what actually happened was there was a society in New York. I think it's called the St. Nicholas Society. I may be wrong about that. But they actually created, before it became this kind of money spending spree, what the initial idea for this Christmas at home and keeping the kids at home and stuff, it came from the society's want to keep drinkers off the streets. So basically in New York, Christmas Day, people would just go out, get smashed. Like Christmas Eve into Christmas Day, they would go out and they would get absolutely fucking paralytic. And this society wanted to kind of, and obviously the story of Saint Nick had kind of died down. It came back in Victorian time, but it kind of died down. And they needed something else. So obviously, like I said, Germany had Christ Child, and the Dutch would, I'm pretty sure it was called New Amsterdam or something before it was called New York. And so this Dutch brought Santa Claus to the New World, to the Americas, and they created this society, and all their goal was to just stop people destroying the city on Christmas Day, by keeping them at home. And then this story came about that Saint Nicholas would come and bring you presents if you're a good boy. And literally what it was initially started to keep adults in line, which is fucking hilarious to me because I didn't know anything about this. But what eventually happened was it came down to the children, and then it's become this family thing, and that's what Christmas is. It's this family event now, and I love it. I don't live for the giving of gifts. I really don't. But I love the fact that it just forces you to go and see people that you, inverted commas, do not have time for in the year. But I think it's hilarious that the reason that this started, that modern day Christmas started, where staying at home and having a family meals and stuff, came about because of pissed up Americans. So yeah, that's been Christmas for me today. I think I literally did a lot of Googling, I did a lot of video watching, and I kind of picked up the bits that I thought were cool. I really think that the Christmas tree story is quite cool, because I think if you asked anybody, why do we use Christmas trees? Why are fir trees the Christmas trees? I don't think a lot of people would be able to tell you. And then obviously Saint Nick is a story that we all know, but I think it's just been kind of floating and it hasn't been grounded. And so looking at it and finding out the motives behind this guy, it was actually, he was trying to push his own agenda in some stories. So he was obviously a bishop, and Christianity was in turmoil in his areas at that time, and he kind of needed to give a deity life, and that's what that was. which is the story that I like to believe. I don't think this dropping gold down the chimney and it landing inside a perfectly placed stocking. I don't know if I'd rather believe that, but I think that story is cool. And then obviously just debunk the fact that Coca-Cola invented red fatty Santa Claus. They had a hand in kind of making it famous and making it current, but they definitely didn't invent anything. But I'm going to remember Hadon Sundblom. He seems like the guy that you could just whip out in a chat. So yeah, that's been solo podcast number 4? Number 4. Coca-Cola invented Christmas. So thanks very much for your time, guys. I managed to get past 25 minutes. I'm happy with that. And it is quite an interesting topic for me. Like if you guys have any topics that you would love for me to just look into and just give my 2 cents on, I'm well down for that. There's obviously, I think there's going to be like a fatherhood one coming. I really liked doing the relationship one, and I'd like to talk about like my son coming into the world and like some of the hardships that we had at the beginning and even before he was born. I'd love to go into that, and I'm probably going to go into that next week. So thanks very much for your time, guys, and like hopefully, you know, this change, and I'm definitely going to lose some listeners without Di. I knew that from the start. I knew that Di's got a much bigger pull than I do, and he's got a bigger draw. And then like obviously, as soon as I put Dialing Ping in a thumbnail, my views go up. But like I'm fine with just having a really dedicated, just group of people listening and just chatting. Like I like literally just you can message me. I don't mind. I'll talk to anyone about the podcast. And yeah, so this has been this week's big fat chat. Next week I'll probably drop fatherhood, and then Christmas week I'm gonna take a week off. I'm gonna take a week off from anything to do with podcasting or album creating, and I'm just gonna live for me and my family for a little bit, because I got a busy life, you know. I work 48, 50 hours a week, and then I come home, I got to do a podcast a week, and I've also got to work on this album, whilst also juggling parenthood and spending time with my family. It's a slog sometimes, but I wouldn't change it. Like I do love the community that started to build with this podcast, and I don't want to lose anybody. I understand I'm probably going to. But last week when I had to rush and I got Gravy on, and it was just, and it was, there's no fault to Gravy. It was just like, it was just really, it was forced from my perspective. We just forced it, and because I just needed to drop it, because I like, my mind was, don't drop. Not like, oh, I'll take a couple of days and I'll create a podcast that I would want to listen to. It was like, fuck, I got 12 hours to get this podcast done, or I'm going to miss my deadline. Do you know what I mean? And I would just rather just have a higher quality product to give, rather than like, so quality over quantity. I am aiming for every week, but I'm looking for maybe spend a day like looking into what the topic I'm going to talk about, and just get like as much information about it as I can, you know. And that's what I'm after. So guys, I've managed to hit almost 40 minutes. So I really hope that this is like, it is your fill, and I hope that you get from it what you want. And yeah, I'm going to drop the more personal ones like fatherhood, and then maybe talk about work, or like anything, like my career. I've had ups and downs in my career, I've had ups and downs in my life, and I want to mix it in with some cool informative stuff. Do you know what I mean? Like as I've said in many podcasts before, I want to make myself a little bit smarter, a little bit more intelligent every day. And you know, making this album is I've gained so much more respect for the people that do it all the time. And you know, the mastering, I'm learning new mastering techniques every day about kind of how to make my voice sound as punchy as I can. I'm still not very good at it, and when I drop this album, I'm probably not going to be happy with how it sounds. But that's me, you know. I'm never happy. I could go back to something I did 6 months ago and change it, and I'd want to do it, and that's just me. But I'm learning, and I've learned today about something that we celebrate every year but don't really think about, you know. Like, I'm not a religious person, so I don't see it from the Christian Christmas point of view. I don't celebrate the birth of Jesus Christ. So like, I celebrate the other traditions, you know, the gift giving, the Santa Claus, and it's nice to finally actually know a little bit about what we're celebrating and why, and you know. So yeah, thanks very much for your time, guys. This has been a good one, and I really hope that, I keep my audience as best I can, and if I don't, I don't. But I'm just going to keep bringing it anyway. Thanks very much. I've been Dan. This is a big fat chat, and I'll catch you next week. Much love.